that. And is it pretty clear? Is it good?
Yes.
All right. Awesome.
Yes.
Okay, so this will take a little bit of finagling, so I appreciate your patience as we roll through this, but so we'll see. So I'll do an official greeting and say good chilly morning. I don't know how it is for you, but here it's up to -1, so that's good. It was like -8 when I got up this morning, so that's pretty painful, but so I guess virtual isn't so bad, right? Because we can just be snuggled up in our warm spots. I'm glad to be with you today. As Cole said, I am Shannon Schultz. I am the Public Library Administration Consultant at DPI. I know a number of you through director certification and the boot camp and things like that. So you may know I've served in this position for just about 6 years. And although my position is limited to legal interpretation of Chapter 43 and records retention and records falls mostly outside of that, still the obligation to retain and protect library records intersects with all sorts of aspects of public library administration, including things like policy development, library operations, public records under Chapter 4330, which is our library records law that's in the statutes. And I am also, for those of you who don't know me, I am a former public library director, so I understand your need to know all of how all of these pieces fit together, and I also understand your pain with it and the questions that Cole had referred to, because I had those same questions, and sometimes I still do. So I assume that all of you are here because you need this information. At this point, it's been difficult for you to understand how records management works and maybe what expectations there are of you. So I'm really grateful for your time. I really appreciate, I know you're all very, very busy, and my intention is to simplify all of this and remove confusion around records responsibilities. So if I don't achieve that for you today, please reach out to me. You are more than welcome to contact me, and I can try to help you through it. So we'll just work together on that. But I'm really hoping that this helps you out. So here's what's going to go on today. We're going to start with, I really try to be mindful of the fact that this is a workshop and not just a lecture where you're just here to listen to a webinar. But there's only so much you can do with public records. So what we're going to do is we're going to start with pretty much a typical presentation on records management during the first part. After that initial part is done, we're going to take a break and stretch and do those things that we need. And when we reconvene, we'll have some discussion time. I'm thinking a lot of times people go to break and they're kind of mulling over the things that we talked or that they heard about, and come up with questions after, taking a stretch. So we'll have discussion after we come back from a break. Then when we go into part 2, that will cover the records retention part of things, because that seems to be the thing that people have the most trouble with. They just don't understand how retention schedules work and what they're supposed to use and what requirements there are of the library, a bit about being the records custodian at the library, those types of things. Then when all of that is done, we will conclude with just a little bit of practice and then finish up with more discussion as time permits, because I know you have questions. So I hope that sounds good to you. I also should probably preface this by saying that I am working from home. Our offices are pretty much closed again, and we're back to 100% remote with Omicron variant. So I have 3 different internets. And so if I drop out for a second, I can be back because I have to have multiple coverages in my rural area, which I'm sure some of you can relate to as well. So I'm really glad this is happening on Teams, because this is the platform that I'm most comfortable with. So I assume that all of you know how to use it, do the hand raising and clapping and doing it. Feel free to do some of that stuff. Anything that you can do to interact while this is happening is great, just because, records retention is a little bit dry. So we'll work together on that. So I assume we're good, so we're going to move on to the next slide. So I just like to see a show of hands, if you can. How many of you attended the records retention presentation that I did in WAPL in the spring? Were any of you able to attend that webinar? Anybody? I'm not seeing, and as the moderator, Cole, if you're moderating, if people chat or if people do anything, I'd appreciate, just let me know if I ask a question. I'm assuming that people.
I don't see any hands. I don't know. Okay. I don't think anybody did.
Well, I don't take offense. That's just fine.
I'm glad you're here.
I just wanted to reassure you, if you were there, because I was a little bit worried about people being concerned about duplication, that if you attended it or viewed the recording, today will not be a waste of your time, because we're going to dig a lot deeper into records management, whereas that presentation was just the part about records retention, which is just a small piece of that much larger puzzle. So by the end of this workshop, you will be able to identify the difference between public records and non-records, record or understand who is the owner of a record, know how to properly retain those records, recognize a public records request and be able to handle that request appropriately, understand how to dispose of records properly, and then know where to go for help. I hope those meet the objectives that you had in planning to come, and I'm sure that there's various other information that will be included, but those are really the high points. You're also going to figure out that I am the parent of a teenager, because the entire presentation is filled with memes. So I hope that lightens the mood and makes it a little bit more fun. You can see Edward's start there with records management is coming. So we will jump into it. Here we go. It is 10:10. First, let's take a look at why public records matter. Public records laws are also called sunshine laws. That's a lot of times what you'll hear if legislators refer to them, or just casually people call them sunshine laws. That is so that people in our state are not in the dark about the workings of government that represents them. So sunshine shines light on it so that people are not in the dark. And according to settled law, which basically means laws that have precedent, that have a firm precedent, states that the general presumption of our law is that all public records shall be open to the public. And this presumption reflects the basic principle that people must be informed about the workings of their government, and that openness in government is essential to maintain the strength of our democratic society. So that's where libraries really come in, and really municipalities and your counties. I use the word municipality more by the letter of the law. So if you are working at a county library, know that when I say municipality, I'm not talking about a city, I'm talking about your county, whatever your municipal governing body is. So just a word for that. So public records law require that every record is presumed to be available to the public, and that access can only be denied in very limited cases. So because of these laws and principles, all government employees, including all people who work in the library, need to have a records management plan. So that's really why we're here today. So records management addresses the life cycle of records. So here is a records life cycle. The life cycle is a period of time that records are in custody of the library, and usually consists of these stages. We start with a creation or receipt of a record, and we'll dig more into specifically what records are, but this is a good start. Then we progress to determination of how long we have to keep it, where we put it, how we use and then store it, and then finally how we dispose of it. So through this first part, we'll be talking about each of these layers of this. And hopefully, I did share a PDF with Cole, so if you just want the slides to have these to refer to, you'll have that. So.
And I did put a link to the slides. I uploaded them to our knowledge base. I put a link in the chat. So if anybody wants to follow along, click on that link.
Great. Feel free to do that, or you'll have it at your reference so that you don't have to feel like you have to write down things that are actually on any slides. Just take notes if you need to have extra information. All right, so moving on. Let's talk about records versus non-records. So employees need to know what a public record is, because public records are the property of your local government, and the law requires us to keep them and make them available to the public. You have your local laws, I have my laws as a state employee, but public records law are in statute. They are a state law, just to give you a little foundation. In general, a public record is anything, paper or electronic, doesn't matter what the format is, that contains information about your government business, with only a few exceptions, like I said. It's important to remember that public records can be paper or electronic. Don't know why I said that twice. I guess I already but anyway, examples of electronic public records include emails, videos, audio files, database content, so like your ILS, instant messages and texts. It can pretty much be anything that you have. So how can you tell if an item is a record? That's question number one. To find out, you can ask yourself some of these questions, and I don't have the questions on the slide, but you can ask yourself, you'll see where I'm going with this. Does the record have, does it record a business activity, action, or an event? So some decision making that you did, or that drove your decisions in the workplace, logged an event, those types of things. Did you need it to prove a transaction did or did not occur? Banking records, things like that. Do auditors require you to retain it? Could it be used to resolve a dispute in the future? And that's always something interesting with records. You have to kind of anticipate what could be coming down the road. Do you need it to identify who participated in an event or had knowledge of an event or was somehow involved? Does it support facts that you claim to be true? Has a person with direct knowledge of the facts retired, or are they otherwise unavailable? Did they take a leave of absence or something like that? You know, if someone makes a records request and the person who owns the record is not around, someone else has to be able to access that. Does it support something that you do? Does it support the mission of the library? Does it have business, legal, or historical value? Sometimes it's just something that's historical, local history, or something like that. Is it mandated by statute or by some sort of regulation or a oh, I'm drawing a blank, ordinance? Does it support financial obligations or legal claims? So that just gives you a feeling of what kind of things. I think all of you probably know what a record is, but if the answer is yes to any of these questions, then it's probably a record. The location of a record does not matter. This is really important. Emails, text messages, or files about government business are public records, even if they're on your personal device. You must keep them and turn them over upon a request. So since the location of a record is irrelevant, it's especially important to keep track of what is and is not a record when you're using your personal devices. Now, I know I was curious of how many people here, I know most of you are probably library directors, but I'm not sure if all of you are. Do we have some sort of a scope of attendance today?
We have a couple non-directors for sure.
Any non-library employees, any trustees or anything like that? Feel free to raise hands or do whatever you need to do if just to get an idea. So we mostly have directors, some library staff. Okay. All right. Whoops. There we go. I lost my slide. Okay, and I know that there was a question about auditors, and I'll get to that shortly. Okay, so I know the reason why I asked about being a director is because I know a lot of times you feel like you need to be reached at any time, and so you may be doing things or messaging people from your personal phone. So I just wanted to make sure I had an idea of how many people that type of thing would affect. It's especially nice to, if you're going to access emails or you're going to do anything like that, that they are on your work computer, so then your phone isn't necessarily subject. If it's not the only copy, you can consider it to kind of be a copy. So it's a little bit of a spare, but I would recommend not using a personal device for like as the exclusive place that you can access any sort of work document. But we'll go into some of those exceptions now, those things that constitute non-records. And the first exception is duplicates. If you have a copy of a document that exists somewhere else in the library or at the municipality, because we have to think about things like employee records and things like that, the municipality may have things like that, whereas you carry the rest of the library records. And you use your copy only for convenience or reference, then that copy is not a record and you don't have any retention time. You don't have to keep it. You can throw it away when you're done with it. The second exception is purely personal property that has no connection to your job. That can be things, it might sound silly, but that can be things like family photos that you have or your framed diploma that are not related to your business, but they're, say, in your office or on your desk or in your workspace. A lot of things can fall under that. So they can't just take your phone and access your personal information. Those are not records if they're not related to work. A third exception is notices or invitations that you do not solicit. And this is an interesting one because I think I've gotten questions about this before. This is stuff like spam emails, which is obvious, junk mail, which is obvious, but listserv messages are included in that. They are not items you generally need to retain under most circumstances, and we'll come back to that. There is an exception to that. And then the fourth exception is reference materials. So that would be like phone books, dictionaries, vendor catalogs, and things like that. Then the final exception that we'll talk about is drafts and notes. The definition of a public record does not include personal notes if you only use them to refresh your own memory and you do not share them with others. The definition of a public record also does not include drafts and working papers without substantive comments, rough notes, or calculations. However, you must retain some drafts, and that's what I was referring to. Some things can end up being a record if you use them for certain purposes, like if they were involved in your decision making for a project. So let's say you got a listserv message and you thought, oh, I'm going to do this. This is part of my decision making, and I'm using this as evidence to go a certain way or do a certain thing in the library. That may be considered a record. So bear that in mind. It's really about stuff that you use to make decisions in the workplace. In which case, then something like a listserv message, just like a email blast, could be a record. All right, so why don't I just hop on to that? What if auditors, how do we know if auditors need it? Since all auditing happens with the village treasurer, I don't seem to be in the know regarding that process. Well, then you probably don't have to worry about it so much. If they're not asking you for records that you need to turn over to them, then they probably have what they need. They would let you know if it was something that you weren't supplying and that you were supposed to have. So I guess I would consider that. When I was audited, they came to the library and sat, next to my office and did the audit of the library right in the library. So I think it really just depends on circumstances. So that's why I included that there. And I see that you're typing, so I'll wait for a second in case you have some follow-up. Does final responsibility for records fall with the village? It depends on what the record is. There are some things, that's why I mentioned like personnel records, because library staff are actually employees of the municipality, then they are likely the record holder for like payroll. However, there could be some things that there could be like their performance reviews. You probably have at the library, hopefully have it under lock and key because it contains personally identifiable information and it needs to be secure. That type of thing would be yours. So it really that's why it's such a complex process, is because there's so much nuance. One sheet of paper could be a record that I created, but it's a record for you because you used it for something, whereas I could have some records and then you could have other records. Everybody has to be responsible for their own records that they do in their own jobs. So everybody, despite the fact that the director, and I'm jumping ahead a little bit, despite the fact that the library director is the records custodian for the library and takes on those responsibilities that we'll cover in a bit, everyone who is a government employee is responsible for their own records. So it can just really depend. Now, my city asked me, I never did it, to be honest. I ended up moving on before it became a thing. And I have no idea of what the directors that followed me did, but they said when somebody quits at the library, since we're the record holder of personnel files, if you would turn over personnel files to us, we can retain them after the person leaves the library. So that's another thing that you can certainly work with the municipality, but once they take something like that on, they're responsible for the appropriate retention and disposal, and then they're on the hook for it if something happens. So something to consider. What about information that is posted on the website or graphic design items that take up a lot of space? Yeah, I don't want to get too much into detail about those types of things yet. We'll go into some stuff, and there's some stuff that I won't have an answer to, I'll be honest with you, that I may have to talk to one of my teammates on. So let's stick a pin in that one. Okay. So I think we're through that slide. So another step in determining whether something is a record is determining ownership of the record. Now, we just touched on that a little bit. Some are really obvious. I probably used some a little bit more obvious examples. The official records holder, who is the person who has the records, they manage the official record because they either created or they received the record as part of their job responsibilities. So generally, responsibility falls on the creator, but sometimes an item can be a record for a recipient if it is used to make business decisions. That's basically what I talked about before with the listserv example. But that can sound a little bit confusing. So I want to take it a step further and use a different example than the listserv. On the last slide, we talked about that records versus non-records, and that an original document would be a record, but the duplicate would be a non-record. So let's say that you and I both have the same document. We're working at different agencies. For you library directors out there, since there are so many of you, let's use director certification as an example, since I coordinate the certification program. You submit your application materials to me at DPI, and I approve and generate your certificate and send it back to you. Actually, the system receives a copy as well. So we both have identical documents. So who is the official record holder? If you want to put in an answer in the chat, who you think would be the record holder, whether that would be you or whether that would be me, I would be curious. If anybody wants to take a stab at that. Anybody, anybody? Certification application and certificate. Are you the record holder or am I? Do I have to wait until somebody? Yeah, there you go. Irma, my pal Irma. Okay, we've got a little bit of dissent. Okay, let's see what happens. All right, so we've got a little bit of a split there. Okay, very good. All right, I'm glad to see a little bit because I want to make sure that you're thinking about those things. The correct answer is me. Because I am the coordinator of the program, I am the one who must meet the retention's requirements for all certification applications in our state. So as the certificant, that's what you're officially called. Let's just say, you know, you could throw away your records if you quit your job. It's where you were never going to be a library director again. Whereas I have to retain your certification materials for a certain amount of time. So when you think about it in those terms, you wouldn't have to produce your certificate because somebody else has to hold it for the minimum retention time. So that makes yours a copy kept for your convenience. And then I have to hold them for the full retention period. So for some of you who are grade 1 certified, grade 1 certificates have to be held. My retention time is 15 years after the certificate becomes inactive. So let's just say that you've been a director since you were 30 and you stayed a director, doesn't necessarily have to be in the same place, just you remained a library director until you retired at 65. So that's 35 years. And say you had just renewed your certificate right before you retired, so it's good for 5 years. So then you'd have your certificate until you were 70, and then I would have to hold it for 15 years after that. So the retention time on something like that is very, very long. You would not need to hold that record that long, but I will be long gone by then, but you know what I mean. My agency has to hold that record for that long. So I hope that gets you into a spot where you can start thinking about how records are. It would definitely be useful for you to keep it. It's not at all that I'm saying you should throw it away and not worry about it, but it makes you don't have a retention requirement with it. So, all right. So then finally, this piece that I want to cover next on the slide, it might seem a little bit out of place, but I wanted to include just a few things about that personal device for library business part in case you do actually do that. I presume that if you own the device, if the item is on your device, that you would be the owner of the record. So first, understand that a personal device may be a computer, a cell phone, a tablet, a Kindle, an iPad, a smartwatch, any other connected device such as cloud backup, a flash drive, or even an external hard drive. It could be anything that stores data. So it doesn't matter what it was. I'm kind of curious about how the smartwatch works, but I guess there could be messages on it if that's what you use to receive, like text messages. Second, any email used to conduct business is a record. We've talked about that, even if it is sent or received by an employee's personal email account. And we didn't mention that. We talked about your personal devices, but if you send it from your, I don't know what, your charter account or something like that, because you think, or if you go and you send somebody a text message from your cell phone, thinking that if you're in the car and you're making a phone call or you are sending from your personal email, that it's going to protect you from it being a public record, that is not the case. You would still have to turn those things over, and it doesn't matter. You're a government employee, and any conversation you have or record that you create is subject to public records request. So something to think about, because I think that surprises a lot of people. Third, You must ensure any public records are properly retained if you transition to a new device. So if you get a new phone and you've got text messages between you and your employees, technically that would need to be properly retained. You should have a method of storing that before you turn that phone in or shut it off or donate it to a shelter or something like that. So you are responsible for those things. And last, materials on your personal device that are purely personal property are not records. And I think I beat that horse already, so I probably don't have to worry about that, but okay. So Caitlin says, I have board members occasionally email my personal, I forward the email and respond from there. That's fine. Then you can, because what you've done in that situation is you have made your personal email a copy and your retention copy is in your work email. So that's a great way to handle it. Okay. Now that we've established what a public record is and who the owner is, the next step in the process is to know how long you have to retain it for. If you have a public record, you must keep the record as long as required by your library's records retention schedule. We'll get into that a little bit. So as I said in the introduction, we're going to go deeper into how to use records retention schedules in the second part of this workshop, but we'll discuss them here as it fits in as part of the life cycle of a record, because that's really what we're talking about here. That's how this structure of this first part is going. So generally, retention schedules are adopted by the library board, and they state how long records must be kept and how they can be disposed of. The records holder is responsible for determining the appropriate retention time, the storage method, and the disposition, which is disposal, of each record in their possession. So if you have staff that are getting emails, they have their work emails, maybe their work laptop or their work computer, they are the records holder, so they are responsible for these things too. So despite the fact that the library director is the records custodian, all records holders are responsible for this information. I know I said that before, but there's just so much to know with all of this. Okay. So keep in mind that records retention schedules indicate the minimum retention time for very specific records. So before you get rid of any record, you still need to make sure that you know that there's nothing pending out there that you're going to need that record for. Those things are things like public records requests, audits, or lawsuits that may require you to hold on to the record for longer. You are not, by law, you are not allowed to dispose of a record that would have impact on any of those things down the road. Now, of course, there is some sort of something in the law that I mean, if something is not, you never have to create a record. If there's a request, you just have to supply the records that you have. So if something happens and you don't have a record, then you don't have to submit it. You don't recreate a record just because somebody asked for it. But you can still, there are penalties to disposing of records before they're needed. So it's something, again, it's something to think about. You're kind of predicting the future a little bit, but if the retention period comes, you are safe to throw it away if there are none of those, if there are no records requests, audits, or lawsuits. So say somebody filed a lawsuit 6 months or a year after the record met its retention and you threw it away according to the rules that are adopted, you're okay. You don't have to worry about that, which is one of the good things about adopting a records retention schedule. I hope that makes sense to everybody. I just want to make sure. Okay. All right, so I'm just going to go a little bit further on that. So that part about you being the records custodian for your library, that is under Chapter 19, Section 33. I know that's not on the slide, but I do have it linked on the resource page, so you don't have to worry about like writing that down. But if you're the director and you're the records custodian, you would likely know if something like that, like if there is a active public records request, or if you know you're about to be audited, or the village, as you said earlier, was undergoing the audit, so it's not a good time to purge your financial records. If you would know if there was a lawsuit that somebody submitted to you, chances are you would know about that stuff if you're the director. But if you're not the director, you should check with your director before disposing of any records. We'll get into responsibilities, as I said, about the records custodian toward the end of this first half, but just be aware that as the director, since you're the one who would have to answer a public records request, you would be the one, you'd be kind of like that final say about getting rid of things. Okay, how are we doing? Everybody doing okay so far? Thumbs up, good, yay, okay. I got a thumbs up from Cole, so I think we're all right. All right. So now we are at the point of organization and storage, which I probably lied. Records retention is probably not very understood, but boy, organization and storage can be a real challenge too. So I know that some people were interested in that, so I tried to add a little bit of extra information here. Referring back to slide 4, where we saw that life cycle of a record, thinking about that, we have our public record in hand. We know that we're the owner, and let's say we know the retention time for it. Say we need to hold on it to 5 years after it was created. So I've got this thing, got to hold it for 5 years. It's got to go somewhere for that 5 years. So we need to determine some way to keep it. So here's some stuff about information in general. This is very, very high level approach to organization of information. We need to organize our information efficiently so that information can be located when it's needed with efficiency and certainty. Documents are available for use in decision making. Open records requests can be responded to efficiently and within the appropriate time frame. Unexpected requests can be resolved quickly. Say we were just talking about that audit situation. So you weren't expecting a request and an auditor is sitting there and say, we need this information from you before we close out this audit and we're leaving in an hour. It pays to have a good organization system so that when you get that odd request, you can grab that, you know exactly where it is, and you can turn it over to the auditor so that they can take care of it, finish their business, and be on their way. Even further, if we go into records in the library, they ensure statutory and regulatory compliance. They support the discovery and public records requests. They support better decision making. You have your information and it's organized, you're going to make better decisions. They safeguard vital information. Think of all that's in your ILS. They preserve organizational memory. They reduce operating costs. They can minimize litigation risk. They can improve the effectiveness and productivity by retrieving information faster. They can reduce redundancy, paperwork, and clutter, which is one of my favorite ones, which if you saw my office or my home space, you'd be shocked that that means something to me because I have a paperwork explosion, but I'm always striving to reduce that redundancy and that paperwork because it always seems like it controls everything. It promotes transparency in government, which is a really, really important part of this, and we can fulfill our obligations to the public as government workers. So electronic documents that need to be shared, such as those belonging to a department or a project, I know that some of you are in small libraries and some of you are in larger libraries with different departments that may have, you know, different staffing levels. But if you can, you should have your documents stored on some sort of shared file server if possible, where they can be accessed in case of an unexpected absence. And that can happen anytime. Maternity leave, somebody unfortunately is in an accident or is sick, or, you know, just has to take a family leave for whatever reason. Change in leadership, anything like that can happen. And it's important that those records still be accessed, because those records, while the record holder is the owner, the true owner is the entity, is the library. So it's important that other people can access that in case of some occurrence. So when a project is started, say a committee convenes, an assignment is made, you assign a task to somebody. It's just a good idea to designate the records holder at that time and the location on the shared file server. I will share with you some resources as far as how to, some best practices on that. I know that can be really challenging, but we're always striving at the state to figure out some sort of naming conventions so that we can be consistent, so we can figure out where things are and what they're called. And many times those things will fall on the director, but it could be assigned to department heads or librarians, depending on the library, the size of your library and your staffing and that kind of thing. So just because the library is the records custodian does not mean that the library director is responsible for storing all records. That's a shared responsibility. And it may help you to assign it to somebody else if you can. So filing physical records regularly and consistently is as important as anything else we probably do. Electronic records in particular need to be named properly so that we can find, so they can be found and managed according to the retention schedule. Following good records management practices can benefit the library in a lot of ways. It can definitely improve that access to information. It can save time, which is always a big thing in the library environment because we're always short-staffed. And it can also save space and money. Getting rid of things is a great thing when that time is up. So, and duplication saves money. You can be on your way to doing more important things if you just invest that time in organizing your information properly. So, all right. And just a little bit more on electronic formats. Please be aware that additional rules can apply to records that are exclusively held in electronic format. If your goal is to go paper-free in your office, then keep these things in mind. Those types of records must be kept in formats that are accessible, accurate, authentic, reliable, legible, and readable throughout the record life cycle. Remember what I talked about? Well, many of you probably realize that with the certification program, we've gone to the virtual. I'm doing it via email, and now I've got electronic records. So that's really important. We talked about, 70 years of holding, well, not 70, 50 years of holding onto a grade 1 certificate information, that person's file, is a long time to think about that being readable in a digital format. So I had to go through a lot of work with the agency as far as what our storage was. Fortunately, I'm in a big environment, but the additional requirements that I mentioned beyond these things are found in Chapter 12 of the Wisconsin Administrative Code, and I have linked that in a later file. That's going to be one heck of a slide, isn't it? That later slide that I have that has linked all of those things. Chapter 12 is in there too, just so that you can see if you do have electronic records, how you need to store them. And generally, major technology systems that we use should meet all of these requirements, but You especially need to think about it if you transition from one system or device, say your work laptop or your work desktop computer, to another, because it's your responsibility to ensure that your old records are retained properly. So be sure to check with your powers that be. I'm not sure how your system's IT works, so I don't want to make any presumptions of who those powers that be are. I know that some people, some libraries get IT services through their municipality, and some through the system, and some do things a little bit more standalone. So just be aware to check with them before doing any sort of project to convert records from one format to another, including if you're scanning paper documents to make them into electronic format for retention electronically only. Make sure that you're checking with people. It will just help you. And a great resource for that is the Wisconsin Historical Society. So I also have that shared with you. So how are we doing? I keep checking in. Oh, awesome. Okay, that looks good. Okay, so even more on organization and storage. So like I said, these first two links that I've shared are best practices for our best practices that the Wisconsin Historical Society has. So I'm going to start there and give you a little preview of that information. I don't have something to just give you some file structure that says, here, you have to use this. But these are just some ideas. And honestly, I would prefer that for things like this, I'm a good librarian in that I'm leading you to the direction of the appropriate resource, but I'm not the specialist myself. So I will put you in the hands of the people who really do this well and not pretend that I am the person who's the best at creating file structure. So the best of the best is the Wisconsin Historical Society. They know how to store stuff. So I'm going to start with this best practice for organizing for organizing electronic records. So you have a little introduction here, and it talks about how that's outlined in chapter administration. That's the administrative code, chapter 12 that I had referred to. Here's that information that I got for you. Now, here are the best practices. And what I'd like you to do, if this really interests you and you want to get a file structure that works for you and you're not just kind of winging it so much, take a look at these best practices as you're designing your system. It talks, some of it I don't think works as well for our environment, like, well, I won't get that deep yet, but do not store records on your hard drive or personal drives. They recommend, because those drives are rarely backed up by regular IT. So if your computer crashes and you get the blue screen of death, you want to make sure that you still have access to those records. So cloud storage tends to be the best practice now. So some things to think about there. Dropbox and such places don't have to, you can get secure things that aren't really expensive if you need to search for an option. So consider that. Design record schedules to your assign record schedules to your folder. So they're basically saying, I don't think this is the most efficient way. I would have a hard time with doing something like this, and I don't want to get too deep in this, but they're basically saying save stuff under the record schedule name, the RDA, which I don't know. I like the hierarchical better, where maybe, let me see if there was an example. Nope. This is a little less meaningful to me as far as the, it's good tips. It's basically, have a hierarchy. So you have your big, like it's the library, and then you have maybe your meeting minutes, or you have some different things, and it's outlined with subfolders and such, but minimize the depth of that folder path. And that's one of my biggest annoyances, I have to admit, in the workplace, is when you have to dig and dig and dig down into folders. So consider this information. I think the other best practice is I find more useful, and this is for actually naming the records. One of the biggest things that you probably are aware of is don't use spaces, use underscores or capital letters, that because spaces can complicate things. So you want to make sure that your characters are full. But like this, or the name is like there are no spaces. Every single one, if you notice, has the date. And I think that's a really, really important part. So you could decide which way you wanted to do it. If you wanted to save your policy with a date first, you could do that. But then when you're searching for it, it might make it a little bit more complicated to find, because everything would start with a number. So those are just some things to consider. They talk about released. It's really, once you get familiar with your records retention schedule, it'll make a little bit more sense when you're looking at something. Think about that, start with the end in mind. When you name it, think about how long you're going to have to hold that for, and name it so that you can identify those things. So alphanumeric, be aware of spaces, keep it short. Okay, so you can look those things over. I just think this is really, draft, final, things like that can be just really important. So then last, when you're developing that file structure, one of the ways that you can go is, here's just a little example. So there's a records retention schedule, XYZ, whatever you want to call it. So it's 5 years, and so you'd call it something, and then that the items in here are keep for 5 years and destroy them. So then underneath you could have folders that go by the year, so that, so it's 5 years and destroy, and you've got 5 years here, so that when you add 2021, for example, to this list, you could get rid of the items in 2016. So that's a potential way to do a file structure that worked better for me as a library director than some of the other stuff. So those things can kind of be combined, but again, naming the records I thought was really useful information. All right, so are we doing okay still with that? I know it's a bear. We have so much information, it's so hard to keep track of everything. Okay, and just this kind of file structure, I just want to mention this kind of file structure uses retention schedules, that bottom part, as a way to keep records together, and then they can be adapted for use in an email or on a map drive. So you could use this scenario on in your email, like if you use Outlook or something like that, and then also in your mapped drive. So, all right, let's move on. Whew, so we're getting there. We're pretty due for a break, so we'll do that as soon as we get to the end of this little piece. Here are some tips for keeping notes and drafts. Think about what documents are personal notes, drafts, and other non-record reference materials. It may be helpful for you to clearly label these things. I have a stamper that says copy that I just chunk, and then it helps. Or you could have something that you could have folders that are labeled. You could keep them in separate folders or in envelopes that are solely for your reference. If you have a file drawer or something where you can keep those things separate from your public records, that would be great. Give this some thought because there could be dangers that arise if you choose to mingle your personal notes and drafts with documents that are public records. I know I always kept, when I took notes during a board meeting for my own personal notes, I wrote it on my copy of of the agenda and on the board packet. And that's one of those things that could end up being subject. I could have made it a public record just by where I recorded it. Whereas if I would have kept some notes with my personal notes for remembering to follow up with different things for the board on something else, then it would only be for my use and it wouldn't be a record. So remember that any notes and drafts you make available for others to reference or share with others in order to communicate information may end up becoming public records. This is that weird thing. Even a sticky note can become a part of a record that it's attached to if its purpose is to communicate information to someone else. So remember back when we talked about how a record could be information received that influenced decision making, like the listserv example. This is an example of that scenario. So if you share something with someone else, it becomes a record for them, but it's not a record for you. Records. I hope that makes sense. Make sure that you ask questions later if you need to. So let's hop into public records requests then and how that works, about handling a public records requests. A public records request is any request for government records. It does not require any magic words or precise format. It can be submitted by email, by letter, in phone, in person, or any other method that they can do. The request can be written, it can be verbal, it doesn't have to identify even the requester or the purpose of their request. Not all requests you receive from the public are public records requests though. Sometimes they just have a general information request. So you need to know the difference between those information requests and a public records request and then act accordingly. And those, I think for librarians, that's probably pretty obvious because information requests is a large part of what we do. So it's probably more like, reference service. All right, so now we're getting into that records custodian responsibilities. Let me take a sip of water. Earlier on, actually, I mentioned a couple of times that library directors are records custodians for the library, and that is per Chapter 19, Section 33. Until now, we've talked, everything that we've said so far, or that I've said so far, about records responsibilities are of all staff, including the director. Now, this is where the responsibility of the director as records custodian diverges from the responsibility of just the record holder. So please understand that difference. It's the responsibility of the records custodians to locate all of the records in the agency or in the library that are responsive to the request. They have to review and remove information that is confidential under law. So you got to figure out what that is. Tell the requester what you are withholding. So they have to be aware that if you're redacting information because it's personally identifiable information, that you have done that. Provide the requester with regular updates on the status of a request. That's particularly important if it's a really large request, like there are lots of records involved in their request. And then respond as soon as practicable and without delay. And those are the actual words in statute. There are more responsibilities outlined in Chapter 19. So if you're a director, you may want to take a look at that. And again, I have that linked later in the slides. But you might be surprised, like that there are hours requirements. It says who your default backup is, which is, by the way, typically if undesignated, it goes to the library board president. So things like that, it's good to know. You have to post that you are subject to public records. There are some various things that a lot of people are not aware of. So you may want to take a look at Chapter 19. So we finally made it to the last stage of the life cycle of a record, which is the disposition of records. And yes, there are requirements about throwing things away too, of course. Non-records can be disposed of anytime as long as they're no longer needed. So you can hold them as long as you want. You can get rid of them as soon as you want. Non-records don't count. Records can only be disposed of in when these three things have been met. First, and this one's a hard one to wrap your head around, I think. So let me know if you need clarification. The retention schedule has not expired and there is not an update or revision in progress. The retention period specified in the schedule has been met for the record. And there are no pending audit, litigation, or open records requests. Now, records containing PII, as I said, public personally identifiable information, must be both kept and destroyed securely. So this could be either storage by password if it's electronic, or by lock and key if it's in your office or your workspace, depending on the format. And items should be destroyed by shredding, whether that be virtual or physical. And the records retention schedule will tell you what you need to do with that record to dispose of it. So it could be transfer to the Historical Society, destroy, recycle. It just depends on the circumstance. So does that make sense? Again, I know that first one is really weird. So if I need to explain it more, I can give it a try. Okay. Basically, the retention schedule that is adopted, if the records retention schedule you have adopted has expired, then you have to hold on to everything. You can't throw things away. That's basically what that means. So I hope that makes sense. All right, here's the slide of important resources. If you require additional information, you may want to refer to these depending on whatever the circumstance you have is. I think that perhaps the single most valuable resource that I can provide to anybody regarding public records and responding to records requests would be the Public Records Law Compliance Guide. And many of you may be familiar, if you've talked to me before about open meetings law. You're aware that there's an open meetings law compliance guide, which is profoundly useful as well. But this is kind of like the companion piece to that. There is actually a public records law compliance guide. Many people don't even know that it exists. So that is right here. It's linked. So if you have that PDF, you'll be able to find it. This is the most current version, and they are the authority for public records. So that this is the Department of Justice is specifically the Office of Open Government is the authority when it comes to records and open meetings. So this is the go-to place, and they have a lot of, so you can see like procedures for authorities, hours for access, records policies, facilities for requesters. There's just a lot, fees for responding, and all of that stuff that goes into records and record requests. So next, we have the Office of Open Government, which is a really important site as well. They are, as I said, the foremost authority on this, and you can see they even had, when COVID first hit and people were going to virtual meetings and all concerned about whether their meetings were meeting open records, open meetings law, they have put out information about that as well. So there's, open meetings advisories about specific circumstances. So this is also a great place to look. And you can see on this side, they've got frequently asked questions, advisories, more information, training, events, all sorts of stuff, which may be a little bit beyond your needs, but it's great to know that it's there. Then, let me hop back here. These, there's a helpline. So these are manned by attorneys. If I've never referred you to this, there's a phone number and an email address. I know that they are bogged down right now. they're really, really backlogged, but attorneys actually provide this information. And since it's coming from the foremost authority, you can trust that they're giving you solid advice. So these are, if you have specific questions about records and open meetings, sometimes you have those things like, my board wants to go into closed session and I don't know if it's appropriate. I don't think it is. This is a great place to go. They can give you that answer. Then you also have the Public Records Board. We'll get into that later. We're the Wisconsin Historical Society. Then I had mentioned the Administrative Code 12 talks about electronics. 1619 is the records custodian parts, and then 4330 is our storage of the library records law. Then, of course, on the other side, you have records retention, the DPI website. My amazing teammate, Abby Swanton, who is our records manager at DPI and does a lot of work for the state regarding this issue. She is a bloodhound when it comes to records. She's amazing. So you have her. I have her contact information at the end. Myself, your amazing system staff, because they are phenomenal. You've got your municipality and your county. I didn't link the county because they don't have one spot to go. And then always, if you have them at your access, I know that's really difficult, but your municipal attorney, or if you're in a county library, your county corp counsel can be of help to you if it goes to that far. Always good to keep your attorneys informed if you have things like requests or possible litigation, because they would likely be the ones to defend you if it is against something that's coming from the public. So that's a ton of resources, but it should all be really super useful. All right, so this is the end. So we're going to have quiz time here. And I want people to put this stuff in the chat. Oops, so do we need to record the destruction? I assume that you mean, I'm not sure exactly what that means. Jacqueline, can you elaborate on that? Oh, here.
Jackie, you want to unmute yourself if it helps?
If it's easier.
Okay, sorry, it just took me a minute to get into the unmute. I apologize. But what I was asking was, okay, so you came up and you had records that you were able to destroy. Should you write a destruction document with signature of possibly like your library board president and yourself saying though that X amount of records met the destruction date, they were shredded by X agency as appropriate, and then kind of retain that or not? Is that something we shouldn't worry about? Sorry.
Personally, I wouldn't. If you have a retention schedule, you just have to meet that. And as long as you dot your I's and cross your T's, you should not have to do that. I would not create a record about records if I could help it. I just would not bother with that. If you feel more comfortable with it because you're worried that somebody is going to try to access something, but if it doesn't exist, it's not a record anymore. So I would not, I wouldn't feel it necessary, but that is a little personal. So.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
Okay, you're very welcome. Okay, so I want people to put stuff in the chat here. We'll buzz through this and we'll take a break as soon as these, we've got 5 questions for you. And we are, and Jessica is on the stick here. So which of the following meets the definition of a public record? Personal notes that you don't share, junk mail, email from your supervisor, or the dictionary you keep on your desk? Anybody else? What do you think? Okay. Very good. Okay. The answer is C. Email from your supervisor. Only email regarding work is a public record. Personal note solicitations and reference materials are not public records. As Irma said, if you like took exhaustive notes or you used that for something or turned it over to someone, that would be a different story. But this says do not share with anyone else. So if you did not share it with anyone else, it would not be a public record. All right, if you have a public record, how long do you have to keep it? Awesome. The answer is B, you are correct. As long as required by the retention schedule, each public record has its own retention and you must follow it. How soon does your library have to respond to a public records request? All right, very good. As soon as practicable and without delay. By law, you must respond to public records requests as soon as practicable. All right, question 4. Must a person who wishes to submit a public records request put the request in writing? All right, you are correct. The answer is no. Public records requests may be verbal or in writing, or chatted or texted or anything. Last question here. Text messages and emails on your personal devices that discuss business, government business are public records. True, false, depends. All right. The answer is true. Texts and emails are on personal devices are public records. So thank you so much. Everybody got them all right. That was awesome. So well done. And let's just take a break. Why don't we take 10 minutes? That took me about 15 minutes longer than I anticipated. So why don't we take like a quick 10 minutes to stretch, get a drink, do whatever you need. When we come back, we're going to take some time for just a little bit of discussion or questions, see if there's anything that we haven't covered. And then we'll go into how to use a records retention schedule. So let's be back at, can we say 11:25? And then we'll roll through the rest. And you've been asking questions along the way, so I did not account for that. So there might not be as much discussion. So let's just get a little break. You'll get a little more hands-on in this second part. All right, see you in a bit.
Hey,
Hi there.
this is fun. Thanks, Hannah.
Man, nobody says records are fun.
I feel like it's answering a lot of questions at least.
Good.
You're like super efficient. Efficiency is fun, I think.
Yeah.
And you are super efficient. Like you're getting a lot of stuff. A lot of stuff done. It's awesome.
A lot of stuff banged out. I know it's a lot of stuff. I tend to, sometimes I worry that I'm a little too brief and concise, but
yeah,
it's my style.
Thank you.
I usually hear that people think that I make things a little bit simpler and more clear cut, so I guess that's a good thing.
Yeah, it is.
Oh, well. Oh, goodness. So.
And I like your memes. I love your memes. You have to, like, you don't, like, there aren't just like records retention memes hanging out there on the internet. You have to put those together yourself. Like, very well done.
They are out there.
Are they? Oh,
believe it or not.
Oh.
They are out there.
Wow.
Isn't that sad and tragic? But there's, yeah. Well, it's kind of funny that they exist. I was surprised. I thought I was going to have to create all of them, but I didn't really do so. It's been appropriate, So, yeah, got a couple more. All right. Hi, Irma. I miss you. Oh, goodness. I suppose it is 11:25, so hopefully people are back because, well, actually, this is a great slide to start with because we're not getting into quite into the meat of things. So to dive back in, we are in the second part of the show. So we only have about 35 minutes left, so I'm going to cruise through some of this, but it's really important that you see it. Then you'll have a little bit of practice, then we'll come together and we'll wrap things up. So why don't we just dive in the interest of time and keep your questions. Like I said, you've asked questions along the way, so I assume that a lot of your questions are being answered. So we'll just wait till the end to see. Feel free to do it the way that you are, but you're going to find out that it may not work the best for the rest of this. But in order to make it more workshop-y than presentation-y, which is difficult. We've got some hands-on stuff coming. So this jumps ahead just a little bit, but I wanted to talk about it before we got into the actual records retention schedules. Librarians and acronyms. So the PLGRS is the Public Library General records schedule, which is basically the records retention schedule that has been created for public libraries and library systems. So we're going to talk about this a bit, but first, so I hope that makes sense because maybe you weren't even aware that there is a general record schedule, or maybe you remember the one that was really old and was like a sheet and a half, a page and a half long, and that's not the one that exists anymore. So it has expired, so it would not be usable. So you would be required, as we learned, to hold on to records forever. So don't use that one. Yes, there is a records retention schedule that has been created by the Public Records Board specifically for public libraries in Wisconsin. We'll be working with it for the remaining half hour. So we're going to go through this a bit. So just sit tight on it. We'll talk about it a little bit more as we dig into it. But we're going to talk about the adoption of it before we even talk about what it is. First of all, these are the reasons to adopt I'm just going to call it the GRS probably from here on in. So if you adopt the Public Library GRS, you are no longer required to notify the Wisconsin Historical Society before you dispose of any records. And yes, you are required by law to do that if the general record schedule is not adopted. So if you do not have this general records schedule adopted formally by the board as your records retention schedule and submitted the notice of adoption to the Historical Society and the Public Records Board, then you are required by law to tell the Historical Society that you're throwing anything away. So many of you probably did not know that. I know I did not know that when I was a director. So yeah, interesting, interesting fact. Second, you may not be aware that you're also required by law to formally adopt a records retention schedule. So you have to have one. You can't just decide, you can't just loosey-goosey, you know, hold on to records and get rid of records and be random about it. You have to have one as an entity that is responsible for public records. So what that means is if you don't adopt this one, you have to adopt a different one. And since there isn't a different one you can adopt, that means you would have to create your own. So who in the world wants to do that? It is so much easier to take what they've done and just figure out how to use it and adopt theirs. So you may want to consider doing that. The third reason to adopt is because adopting this GRS helps with consistency both in your library environment and in public libraries across Wisconsin. And if you think about that, imagine if all of you have adopted, all of you in your system have adopted this public library's GRS. You all use the same one. Cole's familiar with it because the system uses the same one, and everybody is using the same thing and everybody's familiar with the same thing, so that then when you have a complicated question or you're unsure of something, everybody that you talk to in your own library community is familiar with the same thing. That just makes things a lot easier and a lot more consistent. And then fourth, you also know what you have and you know what you don't have, which is really, really helpful when somebody makes a records request. Remember that if you have a record, you have to supply it as soon as practicable and without delay per the law. While some records might be easy to produce quickly, like meeting minutes and things like that, some may be really challenging if you don't know where they are and you don't have good organization. So knowing that you have it would help, because they could make a request and you may spend a lot of time thinking about, oh geez, what other records would be about that topic. So having the records retention schedule will help you to identify what records you have and make you a lot more familiar with the records you have. And then last, it just plain helps with space. Decluttering is a great thing. Being rid of unnecessary things is liberating. And if you don't have it, it's not a record, and you don't have to produce something to make a record if someone requests something that's already been disposed of. So getting rid of things when the retention has been met is a good thing to do, with some exception. And you'll probably see some of those when we look at the schedule. So hopefully you're convinced. If you are, all you have to do is we have this link for notification of adoption, and it will take you right to the form. I'm not going to go into details about that right now, but if this is something that we either have time to do later or that you want help with, you can certainly contact me. All you have to do with this is check some boxes to say, like, you opt in with this one, you know, your government agency. I guess I am going into it. Your government agency is your library name and address. If you adopt in with the entire schedule, then you'll adhere to it the way it is. If you adopt it with revisions, you can opt in or opt out of different series. That will make more sense to you when we actually look at the retention schedule. And then you can opt out of it in whole or in part if you just decide that you're going to use a different retention schedule for something. I probably wouldn't do that unless it was recommended by my municipal governing body, but you do have that option. Then the agency head would be your library board president. Your agency records officer would be you as the director, assuming for those of you who are directors. And then it gets sent on to the Public Records Board and the Historical Society, and they both sign it. And they retain it, and hopefully they're sending the information on to me because I'm the one who has taken on tracking this for the state because they weren't doing so well with it. So it's as simple as that. It just has to be approved by your board. Word of warning, it takes a few months to get back because they meet monthly or bi-monthly, and they have to have it approved by the board before they can sign it. So it's like 3 months, 4 months before you get it. So what they tell you is once you've submitted that form, don't throw any records away until you receive the confirmation that it has been adopted, and they'll send you a signed copy of that as well. All right, so now that we know that it's a great idea to adopt it, let's actually take a look at it and know what we're talking about. So this first link goes to the DPI page that talks about the records retention schedule for Wisconsin public libraries. I won't go there now. We'll just go right into the record. I just like for people to know how to find stuff from the DPI website because it can be a little confusing, and it is under construction right now, but I've been saying that for some time. All right, you can also find the GRS from the Public Records Board site. Under local unit government record schedule section. No, I don't think we're going to see that later, but there are a number of places to search it. Good old Google will get it for you as well, but it's a document you can download too. So let's just dive right into the GRS. You can see we're going to look for some of these records so that you just common records that you might have so that we can figure out how to find them. So first, I want to show you the schedule. So here it is. It's been revised a couple of times, but this is not due to expire until 2027. So this is the current one, and just to let you see it, there's a lot of information here. I know this is, there we go. Really small writing, but there's a whole bunch of preamble here. It talks about personally identifiable information. You can see there are a bunch of links to things that I have also provided links to. So, but it has a lot of great information, stuff about security and confidentiality, really explains the stuff that's in the document. But here's the stuff that we care about. The first part. There are 3 sections that we really care about in this document and that we need you to understand. So this first section consists of library specific records. So that stuff, as you can see, like bylaws, annual reports, donor files, things like that. And you can see there are some headings. So this is board and governing body materials. This is administrative files. So there's a little bit of stuff in there that gives you some headings so that you can find things a little more quickly. But because these records are unique to public libraries and systems, their minimum retentions and dispositions can be found right in this section. And this section goes from page 3 to page 11. So you can see this is the RDA number. It's 001 for bylaws. They're called bylaws. It explains or describes what it is. So if you're not certain by the name, you can figure it out from what they say. Whether it has personally identifiable information. So it doesn't. So it means you don't have to like shred it. You don't have to dispose of it, carefully. This confidential says no, so you don't have to keep it locked up. Here's the stuff, minimum retention and disposition. So this is what tells you how long you have to keep it and what you have to do with it. So this is an event and destroy. So An event is where the event is defined as being superseded. So what this means is that you have to hold on to bylaws for as long as those bylaws are the current bylaws. But once they've been superseded and replaced with a new set of bylaws, the bylaws have been, revised, then you can destroy them. So if we just go through these, that is basically how it works. The notes and examples can detail things a little bit more. Abby and I were involved in this process years ago with some of the descriptions and identifying the things that were library-specific records. So hopefully that helps with more accurate descriptions than just leaving up to somebody who's not a librarian. So, all right. So I assume that we're good with this. So now I'm going to go to the second section. So this was through page 11. So there's a lot of stuff. Litigation files, accident forms, budget records, item records, overdue notices, all that stuff that we use in library land. And I'm trying not to make you sick by scrolling too fast. Closed series is section number 2, and it's important that you understand what these are. This one is actually kind of nice because these are items that are no longer considered to be records, and they're only on page 12. So for example, let's find library newsletters. Library newsletters used to be RDA number 113. Here they are. You used to have to keep them from the time that the newsletter was created +3, which means creation plus 3 years. But since then, they've determined that a newsletter is not a public library record, so there's no longer a retention for them. So you don't have to worry about keeping those things. So these things you don't have to retain as records. You would, if they contained PII, you would need to dispose of them appropriately, like shred them though. So that's something to keep in mind. But like workshop calendars and flyers and things like that, you can just get rid of them when you're done with them. All right, then we jump right into, that just gives you places for your own notes. Revision history. The third section is revision history, and it is not only extremely important, but this is the section that trips everybody up. It's the most difficult to wrap your head around. So if you have only partially been paying attention until now, or you've been trying to get other work done, now is the time to tune in because this is what you need to know. I think that people assume that because it says revision history, that means that these are obsolete or they're in the past, but they're not. This section is imperative to understanding the records you need to retain and their retention time. So this is extremely important. And most of your records will fall in this area. The RDA numbers here are from the old, are from the expired retention schedule. So that's just in case people adopted the old one and then they updated it to this one, that they didn't have to go through that process again. It's kind of like a crosswalk so that they know which RDA number applied to that. But believe it or not, retention times change. So it's important to make sure that you're using the most up-to-date information. So if you didn't adopt the previous one and you're starting out here, don't worry about those RDA numbers. So in this section, you see the series title number, the series title, such as policy manual, and then the revision made, which says superseded by ADM 00023, for example. So this tells you that you would jump to that record number. Here, let me back up a little bit. So in this section, you see these things. You can see that it's general correspondence. So a policy manual is a policy manual. That's not unique to a public library, right? So anybody who has a policy manual in any industry for government would adhere to this, which is on the administration general record schedule at RDA number 23. So what you do here, and I want to make sure that I'm covering all my stuff. It is superseded, which means that that record number is what you would use for the retention and disposition of general correspondence. So superseded does not mean that you no longer have to retain these records. It means you have to go to the different GRS to find them. But this document gives you everything you need to find that. So let's go through those examples that we had. Let me just pop over here so I can see what they are. Meeting room use agreement, board meeting minutes, and library card applications. So we're going to look for board meeting minutes. Where do you think this item would be? Are board meeting minutes specific to libraries, or are they really super general? We're talking about library boards. So I don't know if anybody wants to hop on and say if they think it would be in the first section or the third section. Did we see it? All right, so a couple of people are typing, so I'm just gonna pop through here. All right. Well, this is one of those weird ones that you may want to check here first for library stuff. Okay, so meeting room use minutes. It's not meeting minutes, it's meeting room use minutes. I'm sorry, I think I jumped ahead to board meeting minutes. We're starting with room use, and meeting rooms are pretty specific to libraries. So here it is. So we can see from looking at this that meeting room use agreements contain PII because they fill it out. Yes, it's confidential. So we could, and it mentions 4330, so only people with a court order could access that unless they're like library staff, a parent, those types of things of a minor, and what requirements you have to protect that information, that you cannot release it to the public. And these would be the things that you would redact if someone requested this information. And then the minimum retention is event and destroy confidential. So the event is the end of the business day when the equipment and room are no longer in use. And agreements would include personally identifiable information about the patron, so you would need to shred it when you were destroying it. But it says, if you notice, event description is at the end of the business day or when equipment and room are no longer in use. Now let's say that they wrecked a piece of equipment. What would you do then? Anybody have any thoughts? So they wreck something and you've got something in your policy that says that you're going to charge them for it. So would you get rid of that at the end of the day just because it's no longer in use, or would you hold on to it because there's a potential for follow-up? Yes, exactly. You would retain that information, and when everything was resolved and the person paid for that piece of broken equipment, or you fix the situation to your satisfaction and it looked like everything was fine, then you would be able to get rid of that. You may want to hold it longer, and that's why they give you the option to opt into doing changing retention time. Remember, these are minimum retentions. You can extend them, you just can't shorten them. So that's a good example. So why don't we do another one? Okay, now let's do board meeting minutes. So the first thing to ask yourself is whether this record is library specific or if it's general. And questions, if If minutes are unique to libraries, then you could look in the library section. But if they're not, then we'd look in the revision history. So somebody had said it before, they said the third section because I accidentally said board meeting minutes first. And you are correct. They would be down here, minutes and meeting materials. So here's the information, and you can see it says it is superseded by ADM 00025. So here's the golden ticket. In order to find that ADM 00025, to find out what your required retention is for your board packets, you would go to this link right here, and it's linked in every header of this document. So you click on that, and it takes you to the Public Records Board website. And if you go to the bottom, you have to be a little intuitive. You got to figure out what those things stand for. And you would go to, because it's ADM, it's administrative records. So you pop open administrative records. And then it said ADM 00025. So we're going to go all the way down here. I apologize. Look away if you get motion sick like I do. And here it is. Boards, councils, and commissions. Records associated with boards, councils, commissions. And this would be the retention time. So your retention is the creation of the minutes plus 5 years. And then you are to transfer it to the Wisconsin Historical Society or the UW-Madison Archives. It may include PII, and it may include confidential information. So you pretty much have to review those minutes before sending them on somewhere. Now, I don't know that they always want these things, and that's something that I should probably follow up with you on, because I've asked myself that before. But generally, they take all of that stuff from anyone, and they would determine if it's something that they want to keep for a historical record or if there's significance to it, and then would get rid of things. And then note that there are things like closed session materials may be confidential, and they must be identified as closed session confidential, so you wouldn't have to share those details in a records request. Oh, I see Kristen typing. You probably can bail me out on that one.
Oh, Shannon, no, sorry. I was just going to say I appreciated your mention of historic records, and because that's what I was kind of thinking about that, and thinking that, you know, there are historic records that might fall outside of this schedule. So I appreciate it. I was just writing that I appreciated you mentioning that.
Okay, awesome. Thanks for chiming in. Yeah, it's you know, especially with COVID right now, we just don't know, will there be a whole rash of people who do, you know, doctoral theses on what happened during COVID for social justice courses and stuff, that where our meeting minutes of how we dealt with things become relevant. There just are so many things that they will take, and it could become significant, and we just don't know that right now because we're just here and now. Need to send it on even if they adopted the GRS? Yes, I believe that you send it on, but you don't have to ask them. Or they have to, I apologize. I have to look into that, Jessica. I apologize. I need to review that. I'm a little bleary-eyed right now. So I will check into that. I want to give you one more example before we go too much farther. We are going to hop to library card applications. So that's a good one because library card applications definitely apply to libraries, right? So what about these? Very specific to libraries, we could say. So let me get up to the top. I'll just zip up here. So we know that it would be in the first section, right? So we just pretty much have to, and I know where it is, so I'm going to cheat. So I can just continue to scroll down here and read every one of these descriptions until I get to, oh shucks, I'm in the wrong section. I didn't go all the way up, did I? Oh yeah. Oh, I'm still in the administrative one. Okay. No wonder it closed my other. There we go. Sorry about that. Okay, so I know from doing this a couple of times that library card applications or and such library cards would be patron registration and application forms. So that would be the one that basically identifying the individual, including contact information, who may borrow materials, and who may use library resources. So that definitely fits your library card applications. So this one says, let me get it right here. This one says there is PII, of course. Yes, it's confidential information that has to be protected per 4330, our library laws, our library privacy of library records laws, but it says event and destroy confidential. And that's interesting because basically what it says is you can destroy these. Event is when the information has been entered in the database and has been verified for accuracy. So if you have a process where you turn the card applications over and they get entered, and then you have somebody verified like that they have the address correct and that they're actually, you know, that their PStats and all that stuff that affects funding, that they're in the right place, then at that time, that document could be destroyed. But that said, when I was a director, so there are situations where you may want to destroy those. Man, it saves space. If you're in a small library or you don't have a lot of space to save that kind of paper, you don't have office space or a back room, it's really hard to think of how you would store all of those forms. But when I was a director, I made the decision to extend the retention time on my applications because I ended up having an issue where multiple people were running up bills for lost items and then claiming that they had never applied for a library card. So when I started keeping library card applications on file, I was able to easily prove that the signature on the form matched the one, say, on their driver's license. So I would just say, yep, that's you. And I was able to prove them false. So that was a situation unique to our own challenges. And we had the space and the ability to keep those types of records and keep them because it's confidential information. It has to be kept locked and secure, even if it's in your back room. That is a requirement of all records containing PII. So be mindful when making decisions, if you're going to extend your retentions, that you have to be able to protect those the way that they're supposed to be protected. And you should have a justifiable decision behind why, not just, well, I just don't like throwing things away. You should have a reason why you want to keep some records. So I hope that that helps you think about those things a little bit. All right, so I'm going to pop back to the slide. So we got through our examples here. So in summary for this, when this is just makes it a little bit easier. Here are your steps. You open the GRS. The first thing that it's linked right there, so that'll be in that PDF that I shared with you. Hopefully that'll make it easier. Is it a library specific record or a general record? Then if it's not there, then it's either not a record or a general record. Well, you probably can figure out if it's not going to be a record, but you can take a look there first because it's one page, it's page 12, it's really fast. And if it's not a record, then you can get rid of it. But if it's a general record, then locate the item, in that revision made section, and then click in the header. Let me see if I can just pop there really quick. Oh, I got to be way down here. Click on that header in the revision history, and it'll take you to the Public Records Board, and then you have to figure out which one it is, which GRS it's on, and then you go into that PDF and find the retention schedule. So here we could have grievances are superseded by HR 000110. HR is human resources. That's probably pretty obvious. So you would go to that. It takes you to the website. There we go. Takes you to the website that has all of the general records schedules. You go down and you find human resources. You open it up and they all look the same. And you hop down here and you find the record that belongs to. So it's not as bad as it seems. I know it can be a little confusing. So we are at time, I hate to say. And what I wanted you to do was look up, give you 15 minutes and find 2 records on your own. So what I want you to do is sometime when you have time, try to do this. You have the PDF, go to the It's Your Turn page. You've got the steps over on this side, and these are the records that you want to look up. Find the RDA number, the minimum retention, and the disposition requirements for each, and just make sure that you can do it. It just kind of helps to have that experience. It's kind of like math proofs when you were in middle school. You don't really realize what you know and what you don't know until you're sitting at home and the teacher isn't there. It made sense on the blackboard, but it doesn't make sense when you're at home. So give it a try. And I was hoping we could do that together, but I just talked my head off. So now it is noon, so I understand if people need to scoot. You're probably working in your libraries and may need to do so or grab lunch, but feel free to share anything with me, contact me. I will follow up with the Historical Society. I know that I had that in one of the slides and I'm just not taking the time to remember. So I will follow up with Cole and she can share out with you specification on that. And always, thank you. Feel free to contact me or my amazing teammate, Abby Swanton, anytime. And here are our numbers and our email addresses. So is there anything else? I hope it helped. I probably should have taken longer. I probably should have said 2.5 hours. That's terrible, but it's such tricky information. And I am able to hang around if anybody has any questions. I don't want to keep anyone, so I wanted to make sure to do that. But if anyone needs anything pressing that they want to know, by all means, I can hang around for a while.